Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. Today we go inside Jordan's Zaatari refugee camp, home to about 80,000 Syrian refugees.
The United Nations reports that more than 3 million Syrians have now been forced to flee their country.
This is the tip of the iceberg in Zaatari.
في اللحظة اللي بتخطي فيها الحدود بتصبح لهجة.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. Since the start of the Syrian civil war, Syrians have been fleeing the violence. Many have gone to neighboring countries like Jordan. In northern Jordan, just 7 miles from the Syrian border, the UN has set up a refugee camp called Zaatari. It's now the second largest in the world. The largest is in Kenya. Filmmakers Chris Temple and Zach Ingrassi not only went and filmed in the camp, they actually registered as refugees and lived there for a month. I'm also joined by producers Mohab Khattab and Salam. The documentary is called Salam Neighbor. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So Chris, I know that you guys like to immerse yourself in the experience of the people that you're filming. What insight were you trying to get from actually registering as refugees at Zaatari camp?
No, I think the process was never about simulating the life of a refugee. It was really about being there and having the time to listen in many ways, time to go beyond a lot of the, in many ways, very brief or soundbite level coverage that we've been seeing, because having the other filmmakers or news in this camp were getting 2 hours a day, twice a week. So us to be able to be there, to have a tent, to have these types of conversations was really critical in what we hoped to put a more human lens into this crisis.
Zach, you guys, when you actually arrived, tell us about the process. What happened?
So, having never been to the Middle East before, this was the first time in Jordan, we're pretty nervous. And when I think about why, our only lens into this crisis was through media. And so, when I think about what we're being shown, a lot of it focuses on violence, a lot of it focuses on extremism. And so, we were nervous, but as we arrived into this camp, we're in this car, and it is an overwhelming sight to see 80,000 tents in this small space, and
in the middle of the desert.
In the middle of the desert. So we arrived, but as soon as we got there, and as soon as our tent started to be set up, our neighbors, Syrian neighbors just nearby, help us set up this tent, and we feel immediately welcomed. And that really set the tone for the entire trip. At no point did I feel in danger. It really was overall a feeling of incredible hospitality and welcoming.
So Mohab and Salam, you guys are the Arab part of this. Tell us about your partnership with Chris and Zach, and what appealed to you about this project.
Well, I think from our perspective, we looked at the crisis as something that not one side could fix or another side could fix. We thought that we had to work together. We think in the long term, these are partnerships that are invaluable, and they're the only way we can deal with this issue. And Salam and I developed 1001 Media in order to dispel a lot of the stereotypes that we see in the media today with regard to Arabs, and it's been, Jack Shaheen had a study about 100 years worth of bias in Hollywood. And so we said we need to reverse this. And I think even the refugees themselves are aware of this. They have online access. I think about 90% of the refugees have access to a phone, a broadband phone. And so for us, we were trying to dispel that.
It was interesting, one of the guys at the end, when you guys were leaving, he says, see, we're Muslims. Do you see what is being said about us? Do you see that we're terrorists and jihadists, and what do you guys think? Like that.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to dispel.
Now, that was actually a very pivotal moment for us in the film, is not only what was being said and for all the refugee neighbors to be in the tent with the guys and ask them that, and to say, do we look like what they show you in the media? And Chris and Zach immediately said, no, absolutely not. But for many of my friends, when they saw the film, one of the first things they said, that scene in the tent with a bunch of Arab guys hanging out, having tea, drinking, and eating fruits and everything, and singing. We've never seen that in the media. We only see them as extremists in the streets with yelling, with guns. So for me to see a bunch of guys, Chris and Zach's age, just enjoying themselves in a tent and hanging out with two American guys, that was a real big moment in the film for us.
Let's talk about how people get into the camp. They said that they would come by foot and they would be coming in at night. Why at night? What are they afraid of?
So sadly, a lot of the journeys that are happening were happening at night due to fear of attack during their journey across. A lot of these are families who are trying to stay safe, trying to get across often via smuggler. There's one amazing character in our film who, his name is Ismail. He's 28 years old, been in the camp now for about 2 years, but back in Syria he was studying to be a French teacher, really just like us. He actually looks exactly like Zach's dad in college. And he talked to us a lot about this journey, describing for him what that experience was like, and it's devastating. It takes it to the point even of what he described of even drugging some of the babies so they wouldn't cry during the journey, so you wouldn't have any any danger for the family.
Let's talk about the camp itself, Zach. Tell me about how big it is, electricity, running water, plumbing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you have at this point around 80,000 people living in a couple square miles, which is a very condensed space. And so, this is the second largest refugee camp in the world, the largest Syrian refugee camp. And they've been changing from what started out as tents and now into caravans. So people are living in kind of square box caravans. And a lot of our neighbors have actually started at this point now, we've reached the 5-year mark of this crisis. So a lot of people have been there for 2, 3, 4 years, and they've tried to find a sense of normalcy. And you will even see a fountain, or you'll see people trying to make their homes feel more like their homes, because this population is really coming from a somewhat middle-class life back in Syria. They're used to having computers in their homes, they're used to having homes just like ours. And living in a refugee camp is, for a lot of them, been so frustrating because they don't feel like they have that dignity that they deserve.
لما نسمع كلمة لاجئ شو منفكر نحن كعرب؟
مجبر على الطلعة من بلده ومن داره، ولا مع مصاري، يمكن يجبر بس هو وعياله، بس بوعيهم، هذا اللي إجبار لي. مش قررت أنا أغادر سوريا، أنا أجبرت على مغادرة سوريا. أنا بسوريا كنت أعتبر من أبناء الطبقة الوسطى أو ما فوق الوسطى، من واحد عايش ببيت فيه كل أسباب الرفاهية لا يجي يقعد بخيمة ما بملك شيء.
The first day that you were there, Jordanian security comes and tells you, you cannot spend the night here, it's not safe. Tell me about the security situation. He said that there were thugs there.
So you can actually think of Zatari, because there are 80,000 people, you almost can think of it as a city, because there's a huge range of people living here. And of course, in any space like that, you're going to have some people who are incredibly welcoming, some people who might be considered thugs. We personally felt very safe the whole time. And so, the Jordanian government, of course, though, wanted to look out for us. They didn't want anything to happen to us, and we totally understand that. And
they didn't want it to be in the news that a bunch of Americans got kidnapped or
course,
something happened.
Yeah, you can't blame them.
I think Salam was also worried about us, our mothers as well. But it ended up being a very positive thing in the end, because what it did is it forced us to leave the camp at night, and we actually met one of our neighbors in Mafraq, which is very close by, who was also a Syrian refugee. And actually 80% of Syrian refugees live outside of camps, in urban spaces like Mafraq or Amman, and that was a critical part of our story. So meeting someone like Gasun ended up making our story more relevant and more comprehensive of this crisis.
I want to ask you about her because she's a single mom. She's really, really struggling on her own in Jordan. But you asked, would you just go to the camp? Everything's provided. You won't struggle for food. Mm-hmm. And she said no.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman. She is a single mother, and 25% of refugee households are headed up by women alone, with no male head of household. And that's a very challenging thing in a country that's, an Arab country as well. She said no to that because honestly she's looking out for her 3 children and she wants to give them as much normalcy of life as possible. So even if it means living in a rundown place in a city with, you know, not as much aid as you might get in the camp. I mean, she doesn't get the bread and she doesn't get the you know, the supplies every 2 weeks. But she felt that the trade-off was worth it for her children, and that's why she was so talented. And even though she had been a nurse, she'd started creating these headbands that she sold to local shops and made a living that way.
She's not allowed to work.
She's not allowed to work, and she's not. And you know, we have been in touch with her, you know, ever since we've left, and she's no longer doing that business, but she is now babysitting for her Jordanian neighbors. So I think she just felt comfortable, also in the safety of some Jordanian neighbors that she had met, and they all look out for each other. I mean,
and her children go to school?
They go to the Jordanian schools in the afternoon shift. Yes, the Jordanian schools do allow for Syrian refugees to attend, and it's a separate shift in the afternoon for
just for Syrian kids.
Yeah,
there are that many.
Yes.
Right. Could you imagine that in the U.S. if every afternoon we cycle out our own American kids and bring in somebody?
And we talk about this in the film. They've allowed so many refugees to come into the country that it would be the equivalent of the U.S. allowing half the population of Mexico to enter our country within 4 years. So we're talking about almost 20% of the population of Jordan are Syrian refugees. And for a country like Jordan to feel so overwhelmed, I mean, we're seeing at this 5-year mark of this crisis that countries are actually having to close down their borders.
Right.
And
they're going to reach a limit. They're not a wealthy country.
Exactly, and we aren't doing our part to support them. Last year, we only reached about 46% of the budget, you know, to support host countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and they're the ones that are bringing in 90% of Syrian refugees.
And Jordan's unemployment rate is 12%. Again, think about what would happen in the U.S. if the same thing were to occur with, you know, half the population of Mexico coming in.
What about some of the other Arab countries that are wealthier, like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates?
Right.
Couldn't they open their borders? Couldn't they at least give some of their wealth?
The data is mixed on it. So the data that's been out discusses how many refugees are in those countries. None of those GCC countries, the ones you're talking about, are actually signatories to the UN treaties on refugees. So the point I'm making is why it's not reported. I mean, I actually see Syrians. I'm in Bahrain, I'm in Saudi. I do see Syrians. I do see people in the passport offices getting extensions on their visas. And some of them, their passports have expired. And they're still being given visas in the countries and being able to stay. So my personal experience is I do see it. I don't know the numbers, but the reason why we see zero is because technically the data is coming for countries that have actually signed the refugee treaties. Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries have not signed, so there's zero as a result of that. But I do see them there.
So they're not part of the larger humanitarian system we think of. Like the UN Refugee Agency is really the organization that works with, you know, these refugee conventions. So it's difficult to, because Saudi Arabia and these countries work outside of that system, so it's very difficult to actually understand what's happening inside.
So we don't really know how many are there.
Exactly.
But in the camp, there are Qatari clinics, Saudi clinics, there's a Bahraini clinic, there's schools. In fact, throughout the movie, you actually see, you know, the cross swords and palm tree logo of Saudi Arabia. You see the Bahraini flag, you see the Qatari flag. So you know there's a presence there, and there's a list of 54 different NGOs that actually work within Zaatari, and I did see that.
Chris, let me ask you about all the card playing that was happening in this film, because there was a lot of card playing, and I want to know how, especially the men, passed their time.
I mean, imagine you leave your life, again, upper middle class life, you're then thrown into a refugee camp, you think it's going to be 2 or 3 months, and then a year passes, a second year passes, third year passes, and you don't have the right to work, you're in a camp that's about 2.5 miles by 1.5 miles. And so what do you do? You're sitting there, and so a lot of the time was spent, playing cards and having conversation, talking politics, for 8-10 hours a day. And then what we've just started to see, which makes Zaatari itself actually really interesting, is that inside of this contained space of the camp, Jordan is starting to allow people a bit of more right to work and kind of turning a blind eye to it.
Within the camp.
Within the camp itself. So, this is a camp now that has over 3,000 businesses operating. There's a multi-million-dollar economy on this main market road where you can buy slushies, you can buy wedding dresses, you can...
This is the Champs-Elysees.
The Champs-Elysees, yeah, exactly.
Or is it Champs-Elysees?
Champs-Elysees,
For those Arabs that understand that
There's
reference.
even
They still have their sense of humor.
Yes.
yeah.
They do.
There's now even a pizza delivery system that can go around this camp. So, you know, it's this idea that everybody, it's human nature to want to recreate your life, to restart, to be productive. And people don't want to be
sitting around.
They don't even necessarily, you know, no one wants that sympathy. They want to be moving forward with their lives. Yeah.
So one UN aid worker said this about the camp. He said, quote, "We were building a camp. They, meaning the Syrians, were building a city."
And that really encapsulated our experience. You know, I think our immediate response is to, you know, people in crisis need tents and they need food and shelter, which is completely true, but this is no longer just a short-term crisis. We've reached the 5-year mark. This is a long-term issue, and Syrians from the very start immediately wanted to start restarting their lives. They didn't want to put their lives on hold. One of our close friends, Ismail, who's featured in the film, Chris mentioned him before, but he was studying to be a French teacher, and he had this whole future ahead of him, and had that just grabbed away from him. He didn't want to leave his home country. He was forced to leave. And to live in Zaatari, where he doesn't even have access to university, was really difficult for him. So he, you know, you see Syrians helping Syrians. You see Syrians taking initiative, starting these businesses. You see Ismail actually has started this Syrian youth committee where he tutors young men like Raouf, who you see in the film.
Don't jump that, because
Yes,
I want to talk
we'll
about
get there.
Raouf.
He is amazing, but
He's the star of the film.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
But Ismail, he is one of many who have really taken initiative and are trying to make do with what they have, and he's become a big advocate for university and trying to push, you know, what does a refugee camp really mean? How do we restart our lives and push for a future?
And I think the key is the refugee camps are really more about first aid and making sure that people are safe. And the Syrians were looking beyond that. We said, we've already got that. We want to recover at this point. And then the next stage, development. And so that's the difference, is the UN is really built for the first aid, and they were already hitting the recovery stage. And that's what's interesting about what the UNHCR and a lot of these NGOs are doing. They're looking at public-private partnerships because they're not really geared toward recovery. And that's what we were seeing in the camp, and you saw a lot of that in your discussions with Killian, who was the camp manager.
And we've talked a lot about the men in the camp, and I want to make sure we do talk about the women in the camp, because they are, 75% of refugees are women and children. And because of the culture, Chris and Zach are able to easily discuss and meet up with the men, we did make a point to reach out to the women, the refugee women. So you saw that in Gussoon, you saw that in the wonderful Ali, who has suffered so much, yet late in life has been able to turn her life around and turn this crisis into an opportunity, and became a volunteer with the IRC because of the craft work she had done, and that has re-inspired her life and given her a reason to keep moving forward and given her new meaning to life. And that's a huge, for me, in terms of the women there, women being an Arab woman myself, to see that is just super, it's just so inspiring.
I wanted to ask you about that, because it was her husband, who's an older man,
Yes.
clearly conservative people,
Yes.
who said, he commented on that. He said, in Syria, the women stay at home and they don't work and they're somewhat marginalized. And he said here, they're going in and out, they're independent, they're earning money.
She can have a conversation with a man, yes. And
is one of the silver linings of this camp
is.
that we're seeing some of that positive social change?
Yes. And that's a critical component also of aid help is psychosocial support. So what the IRC does provide for these women is these amazing women's centers outside of the camp and inside the camp that give the women, the men have a lot of freedom to walk around the camp, and the women, can as well, but culturally they tend to not stray too far away. But the IRC women's centers and other women's centers like that have given them a reason to leave the house and regroup and kind of connect with each other and support each other. And that is such a critical part of the support they receive inside the camp, and the women kind of helping each other is a really important aspect of recovery.
And Umali is an example of that. But that's not the case with all women. We need much more of these services and these women's centers. So it's not only in the camp that these women's centers exist. So actually, Gussoon also had access to a women's center in Mafraq. But many women all around the region are still very isolated because, like you said, 25% are single women with families living in urban areas where they're doing all they can do just to protect their children, and providing outreach, providing safe spaces so that these women can take advantage of this disruption in their lives, and even in best case scenarios find empowerment. Those are the services we really need to be supporting in a much more robust way.
And you identified one of our underlying themes in the film, which is turning crisis into opportunity.
Let's talk about Raouf.
Yes.
My favorite.
10-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Immediately when you guys arrived that very first day, he was there helping with the tent, helping with everything, kind of taking over.
Yeah, I mean, we came into the camp, and as Zach was saying earlier, I mean, day one, we were very out of our element, as you might imagine. The tent's just spanning the horizon, and we're setting up our tent in the middle of the desert, and him and his family are the first people to kind of come out of their caravans and tents next to us and help us set up, show us how to kind of get the lay of the land. He took us to bread distribution the next morning, and he really took us around the camp. He was our little guide, but what we realized is, he had so much time to take us around, to be showing us all these things. That's when we realized it's been actually about 2 years since he'd been in school. So we spent a lot of time pushing him on, why aren't you in school? Why don't you get back into school? They've started to provide actually schools in these camps up to through the high school level. And
he always had an excuse. No, I can't find the class. And you're like, we'll go with you.
Yeah,
we'll
it'll
help
take
you.
an hour to get there. It'll, and again, this was such, I think to us, this was that moment that really showed our real ignorance in this situation, that no matter how much I thought he was just a little kid like myself making up excuses about not wanting to go to school, and we finally convince him and we walk with him to the classroom, and then as he's walking in, he literally couldn't cross that threshold back into the classroom, and he just stops in the doorway and he breaks down and he curls up in this little ball, and we found out that we were speaking to his father, and we found out that his school was bombed back in Syria. And he's dealing with this trauma and this emotion of what that experience was like. And I can't even imagine being a 10-year-old kid and going through something like that.
And even to this day, 3 years later, he's still not in school.
So we're happy to announce that we were just back in the camp last month, actually, and thanks to work with Save the Children's centers, these trauma healing centers, and mentorship from Ismail, he's back in school. So,
okay.
Small strides are being made on that side. But Raouf, what he represents is this entire generation that's at risk, where he's, on average, people live in these camps for 17 years. 17 years, I mean, I'm 26, it's your entire lifetime that's there. And so it's so important to be thinking about, like Zach said, with these women's centers and these trauma centers, to help be supporting beyond just first aid and supporting on this recovery and development, so that we don't lose Raouf's generation, because otherwise who's going to rebuild Syria?
That's right. Chris, you got really emotional at one point in the film. What triggered that for you?
So, I mean, the moment where we break down happened when we found out about Raouf's school. And I think we found out about our own, we'd been pushing this child to go to school. We'd been thinking his excuses were just like our excuses when we were younger. And although we'd spent this month together and he'd been always laughing, always playing, there was so much under the surface for him, so much of this trauma from having had his school be bombed. And yeah, that was the moment where I just really broke down, and both of us did.
In the film, you say, quote, Zaatari is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Is there a way to make Zaatari more bearable for the long term?
If we don't support host countries in the way that we should, refugee camps can become a necessity. When the reality is, a refugee camp, the idea of warehousing someone possibly for 17 years, that should never be the solution. If we can come together as a community and invest in a country like Jordan, where we can have outside companies come and create win-win solutions, where you have investment and you have labor from a skilled Syrian population, there's much better ways forward. And so, why we were here in Washington, D.C., actually, yesterday we had an incredible screening with Congressman Ted Lieu and Senator Chris Murphy. We had a full house, and they're leading the way on trying to push forward initiatives to really support countries and really support the people that are at the front lines, trying to make a dignified life for Syrian refugees. And to me, refugee camps aren't the solution. So how do you turn Azatari and allow it to become a more organic city? You know, and you already see Syrians doing that, and you see Jordan and the UN Refugee Agency starting to respond, and that's why you see all these businesses and this economy starting to spring up. It's not necessarily the case for all camps, but we see that as the future.
And the host countries are unsung heroes. I mean, we're not really appreciating what they're doing. This summer, there was so much hype and so much angst about the number of refugees that were going into Europe. Yet David Miliband actually gave a very interesting and insightful statistic. He said there are more Syrian refugees in Istanbul by itself than all of Europe.
What do you want the United States to do?
I think it's twofold. I mean, I think the most important thing is supporting the host countries. Supporting the host countries, not just giving money, but helping in development. I mean, it's got to be housing, it's got to be economic development. We'd love to see more and more free trade agreements, even development of SBA type, small business association type loans, so that local investors and maybe international investors can come into Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan, I mean, including Gulf investors, and say, wow, okay, I have an opportunity. If I make this investment, it opens up markets for me in Europe and in the US. I can have access to funding. That's what we should be doing. And a lot of these refugee camps are actually in rural areas, like in Jordan, where the unemployment rates are higher. So it can be a win-win, just as Zach was saying. That's what we really need to be doing. But also share in some of the burden. I think in the end, we should allow a certain amount of immigration of refugees. I mean, we're not talking huge numbers.
Yeah. I think it's also critical. What we've seen with this film is we've been able to go beyond the statistics and the numbers, which continue to grow year after year. But every time we share this film, we see people walk away, and immediately there are changes in perceptions and negative perceptions of who a refugee is or who a Muslim is. And to have an American audience that is now a little bit more open-minded and educated about refugees because of people like Raouf and Gussoon and Umali, that's such a big accomplishment for us. So even if we are able to just change a few minds so that they are more welcoming to refugees, whether as host countries, supporting host countries, or here in our communities, then that's a big accomplishment for us.
That'll be the last word. Thanks so much, guys, for coming in. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can connect with us on social media and leave your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.